and welcome to another Battle Games in Middle-earth YouTube video. This is going to be a little bit different from my painting tutorials or battle reports, but it's based on the fact that so many people in the hobby, whether it's Warhammer or Lord of the Rings, particularly Warhammer, or any kind of toy soldiers, basically it's a question everyone always asks, and that is, how do I strip somebody's terrible old paint job off that miniature that I've just bought second hand, whether it's plastic, resin, or indeed metal? Now, this is a trick that I've been using for years now, and I don't know why everyone else doesn't do this, but it's strange because it's so perfect. It's uniform results every single time. It's a little bit laborious, but if you're saving the amount of money you do on plastic toy soldiers by doing this, by just getting them second hand, then it's well worth me sharing this to you. In particular for Lord of the Rings miniatures, because Lord of the Rings miniatures, there are so many sculpts that haven't changed over the years, and that have been collected by lots and lots of young people who buy into the game, paint them terribly, and then lose interest, as a lot of people do in the hobby. So, in particular, I'm using Lord of the Rings miniatures as an example, but you can apply this to any kind of Warhammer or any kind of toy soldier across the board. I'm pretty sure, as long as it's made out of plastic or metal or resin, this is going to be your tip of the day. So these are the things we need. I'll just dig behind me. So I've got a handful of toy soldiers. So we've got an old metal orc that somebody painted and based in this horrible, lots of static grass way. I don't like that. We've got a plastic orc, again, not a particularly well painted model. Oh, I've just dropped one. Luckily it was metal and it didn't snap. So these, and I've got a handful of these. They're lovely models, but they're painted really badly, and, well, I suppose they're not even painted that badly, but they're painted not by me, and I'm a fan of putting my own toy soldiers on the table with my own paint on them. So, what I'm going to need to do is strip these. So, I'll get that off the floor, and I've got a few different ingredients for you. So, ingredient number one, crucial ingredient, brown Dettol. I don't know whether you can get this abroad, out of the UK, but I'm sure you'll get this sort of thing. Now, the crucial ingredient here is chloroxylenol, and that's the percentage, so 4.8%. So this is well worth finding. If you can find an equivalent around the world, great, go for this. If you're in the UK, brilliant. Dettol. Home brand ones don't use this this chemical here. Some of them use something different for their active ingredient for the antiseptic, but brown antiseptic Dettol, that's what you want. £2.50 a bottle, and you can reuse it. Next thing you need a jar of this stuff. Now this is purple meths. I'll put I'll find a better picture of it once but this is what it looks like when it's been used. You use this over and over and over again because it's still a chemical. You can smell it and it smells chemically. What else have we got? Now, of the other things we need this fairy washing up liquid. You can see all the paint spots because I scrub a dub with this. So fairy liquid, any washing up liquid will do, but this is stronger, so I use this, and it actually works a bit better than the home brand stuff. So that's 3 things so far. The next thing you need is a selection of toothbrushes. You can use your old ones, or you can get some specially purchased ones. The harder the bristles, the better to an extent, as long as they're not ridiculously hard. Don't use wire brushes because that will scrape the surface off the plastic. But if you get hard plastic brushes, perfect, go for those. So if you've got, you can get like ones that people who smoke use to get rid of the stains on the tooth. So those, toothbrushes. And finally, you can do with something that, a bit of mesh. I use this old handbag I found, it's like a beach bag. That can be useful for filtering things later on, but that's not essential. And of course, rubber gloves, because it's a stinky process, and the chemicals, although they're not going to burn your hands off, at least having some gloves will stop. Well, basically you're going to be handling it a lot, so you need to not really be soaking your hands in chemicals that are basically being used to strip paint. So what I do, I get my roses box. This is a sealed plastic. Sealed plastic is important because it does smell. If you've got somewhere that's fumigated or outside, then that's fine for scrubbing. I do it in the kitchen with some fans on, which it doesn't always go down really well, but it's fine because the smell is Dettol, it's not too bad. But what I do, take the lid off, what it looks like, without dropping it everywhere, is it looks a bit like this. I'll just tilt the camera down a little bit. So that's what it looks like, and that's got lots of stuff soaking in at the moment. And what I do, basically, I just leave this and I top it up with brown stuff, and I use the mesh bag to filter the guck out once it's done. But what I'm going to do, get my toy soldiers, just dunk them in there, and that's the starting process. Dettol, that's the first thing. Pour a load of Dettol in there, soak it in there for a long time. Crucial, you can't do this in an hour. You can't do this in 10 minutes. You've got to let it soak at least overnight. I usually just leave it for a few days because then you know it's going to really get involved there. So let me just find one of the previous things that I've been working on. This is an elf. This has been in there for a few weeks and the paint kind of starts falling off. But I'll show you what happens once I've soaked these orcs, and I'll get working on the next process in a second. We'll fast forward a week. So we return 2 weeks later. It's taken a lot longer to get round to this than I expected, but that doesn't really matter. You can usually soak these for a long time without really causing any damage to the plastic. You might want to just be careful because sometimes more very, very fine detail, fine spears and things like that, they can become a bit softened just because they're soaked in not just chemicals but water for a long time. So but this is what it looked like before we got onto it. So as you can see in there, it resembles the worst kind of soup you've ever encountered, and you can see all these little bits of paint flaking around it, and that's what happens. This is what, when I mentioned earlier in the video, this is what this is for, so you can filter out the paint from that. You could use an old sieve, or you can actually use filter paper, but I found that ends up getting soggy. So anyway, let's find some. So see, these are the elves I mentioned earlier. They're still in there, so they're fine. But here are, see that going? That's the spear go. So I'm going to just pop them on the lid over here. What I'll do, I always just take them, a few of them out at a time. So you can see they're kind of covered in guck, but you'll see in a few minutes' time how much cleaner they get. It's amazing the cleanliness they get. So I'm just going to literally pick all these out. So you see I'm struggling there to just see whether I've got all of them. There we go, finally got the final handful of them. That is one of the downsides of leaving it soaking like this. You can sometimes, if you do break something just by shaking it about accidentally, you lose a spear tip. You just want to be really careful if you've broken a spear off, or even just if you've lost that miniature. If I don't know, you're stripping a head off, I don't know, something like that. It's worth just checking. There you go, that's what it ends up looking like. That is literally Dettol. That is literally brown Dettol like that, as we said, soaked over a long period of time. So what I actually do with these models, literally, I've got a little sink full of water here, not full, like it doesn't really matter, it doesn't need to be full, and I've got my fairy liquid. So I get a little tub, you can use anything for this, get a little fairy liquid in there, and I put a little bit of fairy liquid in the sink. This is, as I said, this is just in my kitchen. It doesn't really matter, it's not horrible chemicals, so it's actually not a problem. But all I need to do is, I use the sink because if I flick loads of little tiny, you get these kind of goopy bits of plastic that stick to stuff, so if it lands in water it's better. Try and avoid scrubbing it anywhere where it's going to ruin your paintwork. Then literally all I do, hold it up to the light there, you might be able to see it, I get the brush, I get a bit of fairy liquid on, and I scrub a dub, and you'll be able to see, hopefully, straight away the effect that this is having on the paint. Fingers crossed this person didn't use some unstrippable kind of paint, otherwise it'll be quite embarrassing. Let's just keep scrubbing away, and what you can do, you realise that it looks kind of laborious, as I said, but you cover it in this really thick soapy lather,
and eventually, fingers crossed, if this has worked at all, it should get rid of most of that paint. So let's just rinse away, get some of that off, and you're starting to see that actually the paint is just really coming off quite nicely. See there how that is plastic already, so that's gone from paint to plastic within a few scrubs, and there you go, there's the front. So as you can see there's a few bits of paint left in the eyes and stuff like that, or like maybe get a little bit of black underneath the arms or underneath the legs, but actually, considering this was, you know, badly painted, looked awful, you know, this, and you can kind of see the strings of paint sort of coming off the edges of the sword and stuff like that. That is almost as good as a brand new orc, isn't it? I mean, not far off. Get that little bit off the head there. And this is the thing, and obviously, I don't understand why people would use any other method, because that wasn't that easy. That was so much easier. I mean, sometimes it's a lot harder because people have painted with, you know, enamel paints or whatever. In fact, there you go, I think that's done. In fact, these metal ones that I pointed out earlier, they are done in kind of enamel. So let's just see. So that's what it looks like now. It's soaked in. It's got a little crud coming up. So see this kind of goopiness at the bottom. This is all the PVA glue that's just kind of wipes off. It's all a bit gooky and horrible. So you can try and get that comes off like a big old blob. So that's horrible. We don't want that. So all we do is just I just got to scrub it in the sink and it'll come off on the bits and it'll wash down the sink eventually. So I get plenty of PVA of fairy liquid. Just scrub it up and just watch this. Watch how quickly this peels off. So this, as I said, it's 2 weeks. So I mean, you can do it in less time, but the effect is so much worse. You end up getting all these little bits of plastic, sort of goopiness everywhere. And you're probably thinking right now, well, what's the meths for then? What are you using the meths for? Well, I'll show you. If I get a particularly stubborn bit that's just not going to clean off, but then I use the meths. But as you can see, that looks absolutely fab already. So, but see what? Look at that. That's perfect. God, you wouldn't know that had been a second-hand model that I paid, you know, a couple of quid for in an army set that someone had sold on eBay. That is amazing. Look at that. That is perfect, isn't it? I mean, a couple of gaps here and there, but that just shows you how easy it is. Now, I'll try and show you using my jar of meths in my jam jar. So, what this will do is, if I get this to the side, it's the exact same process. So I just put it in the side here, and what I'll do is I'll use this instead. So meths is the same kind of chemical process. It's just stripping the oiliness away. And look how quick that comes off. Look at that. So you could do either, or you can do both, which is what I usually do. Usually I scrub it first with a bit of fairy liquid, and then I just soak it in meths, or give it a final scrub in meths if there's some bits, little tiny bits. You can see these kind of little tiny bits sort of clogging up on the there you go, that little tiny bobble there. That's just, it's just kind of, I don't know what it is. It's just the way that the paint forms, but it gets stuck and comes off. But there you go. Look at that. That's and you can't smell it at the moment. Obviously, you're watching a video, but it doesn't smell terrible. It smells okay. It smells kind of clean. So I mean, if you're going to do this in your kitchen, maybe be a bit more careful. Maybe open the windows. I've got the fans on. You might be able to hear rumbling in the background. I've got extract fans in the kitchen, so that's fine. The ex didn't really like it, but she actually, I remember her saying that the Dettol smelled like disinfectant, so it just smelled like kind of clean. So I mean, it's not the most pleasant smell, but it works. There you go. So what I'm going to do, I'll scrub all these and come back to you and show you the effect, and I'll tell you how long it took as well. So I've scrubbed a few more. I've got another metal one in front of me, and this is just a metal. You can see all the goop on the bottom end here, And now I remember exactly what the purple stuff is really useful for, or most useful for. So, if I give this a scrub with this, what happens is, you can see it slowly kind of coming off. But what it'll do, it comes off in a big old lump. And like that, see how that's covered there? And sometimes those lumps get stuck into the bristles and it just doesn't work. So, give them a rinse in your purple meths. And what that purple mess does, it's just a bit of a stronger way of breaking it up, and it all just flicks off in tiny little bits now, and it gets rid of the rest of those big globules of PVA glue or paint or varnish or whatever it is people have been used. But I found that literally sometimes the mess is enough on its own, sometimes the fairy liquid's enough on its own, but often you do end up with a couple of stubborn models that just don't quite work. So that's what I do. I give it a good scrub with both, or at least I have both on hand just in case. And then look at that. That's absolutely glorious, isn't it? So there you go. It's perfectly clean and nice, and nice rare orc. Paid very little for, and it's now added to the collection, ready to be painted, potentially in a future video, we just don't know. But there you go, there's a couple more and I'll come back to you.
So there you have it, whether it's the metal orcs here that all look pretty damned good, or whether it's the plastic orcs which look kind of a mixture. It just shows the effectiveness of this kind of a method of stripping plastics. Yes, it can be laborious, but it's really effective. And also it works on resin models too. Here are a couple of Rohan guys that I stripped just because I'd never really used resin before, but I wanted to check whether it'd work, and it certainly does. It's not perfect, but once you've put a can of spray paint over it, Bob's your uncle. Thanks for watching.